What happened to the undergravel filter and filter plates? Well, back in the 70s and very early 80s, they were still well known and well used. In fact, if you look at a lot of these YouTubers, they're not even old enough to ever have used one to say it was no good. So they're dissing something off of what? What 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 is that they're basing all their knowledge off of when they can't have first-hand knowledge? And anybody you talk who's older and did use them, they make all the claims like I have, how they used to work great for them and they didn't have any problems. So you have the newer generation who wasn't even born saying that something doesn't work, that they've never tried. And you have the older generation of fish keepers saying how great they worked and they didn't have any problems. And it was only until the about 1980s, which a lot of these people weren't even born who are doing these YouTube channels, that it finally started going out of favor. And maybe we can get down to the nitty-gritty about a product that the older people say worked great, and yet the younger people who've never used it claim how bad it is. These are some old advertisements. And like I said, these advertisements are older than a lot of people have even been alive about undergravel filter plates. And they weren't made cheap. They were strong enough, as this advertisement shows, to even stand on. So they weren't a cheaply made plastic piece of garbage. And you wonder that air pumps have lasted, hang on the back filters, canister filters, sponge filters. This is the only filter that didn't make it through time. And like I said, the older people seem to agree that it worked and it was very good, but they were convinced not to use them. And not that they were cheap products or broke on people or they wouldn't last. In fact, once you set up an undergravel filter, it would last forever. Nothing would break on it. They were the only product that you could buy that you knew wouldn't deteriorate over time. It was always there and it was easy to set up. You just put it at the bottom of your aquarium and threw your substrate on top. It was just that easy and that simple. But where did it go wrong? What did start happening to it? Well, as we know, as time went on, little by little, advertisers started changing because they needed to change to have people buy products. And the undergravel filter then became one of those products that people started running them faster and faster and faster. That's just the way they were built. The manufacturers kept saying you had to run more water through them constantly on a faster basis. Then you have products like this. These were the newest thing. Curved bottoms, no longer the nice flat undergravel filter. And once these were made, as you can see, the bubbler, unique plastic air diffuser, it was smaller, made smaller bubbles. This is all designed to run them faster. And once this happened, then they started making power heads. They were primitive back then. They couldn't be submerged. They just went on top of the uplift tubes and they started pumping anywhere between 200 to 400 gallons an hour. And soon that changed to even go as high as 450, 475 gallons an hour, pumping more and more water through the undergravel filter plates. And this became now the norm, all because manufacturers wanted to make more and more money and sell more and more products and convincing people that this is the way the sewage treatment facilities did it. that to bring water in and to pump it through the filter, and faster and faster. So it literally not only became biological, but like the dirt magnet, it then became mechanical. Here's where things start really going sour. And this is an advertisement from about 1980. Reverse flow undergravel filters. And this one was literally designed with holes at the bottom of the uplift tube to suck in the fish waste and detritus and everything else and push it underneath the undergravel filter. Okay, and then it would be broken down, and then you could suck it out later by removing the tube and putting a hose up to the uplift tube and sucking out the detritus and mum and everything else that was at the bottom of the plate. And supposedly clean water would come through and it would be sucking in waste. Well, now you can see why. Natural organic decay takes place unseen and in total darkness. The constant sweeping and cleaning action of the surface of the gravel clean rapid flow of oxygen water decomposing process in the gravel for beautiful plants because they cannot feed on disturb the decay bed. Periodically the bed can be back flush. And okay, so as you can see, this is the advertisement that was going on, that what manufacturers started doing. They actually had a product that they began changing themselves, and then you can understand where people now said, oh, it's too inconvenient to go in there and clean out all this dirt, and what do you do with it? And see, this even claims it's great for plants, but they would say, well, the flow rate is too fast, the plants don't like it. Remember, this was in the 80s when things like CO2, never even heard about CO2 really. In the 70s and 80s, nobody used CO2, wasn't ever brought up about CO2, that plants actually needed CO2, that plants actually needed water movement, but very, very slowly past their root systems. And as you can see, more advertisements are coming out about this. Improves breeding environment, safe for fish and plants, saves time and energy. All these things were being brought out about undergravel filters, and not knowing that what they were doing was destroying the whole undergravel filter plate. Kind of reminds you of Kodak, doesn't it? When Kodak destroyed their own product, they literally destroyed their own product, film, with digital. Kodak did that. They destroyed their own product by bringing out digital. And once digital came out, Kodak couldn't turn around and undo the damage they had done. And that reminds you of these undergravel filters and filter plates. The damage now was being done, and they could not undo it. So they came up with advertisements like the one you're looking at here, where they're talking about how it electricity, you won't get shocked, time and energy, safe for fish and plants. You see, they're starting to backpedal real quick with the advertisement. In fact, they started backpedaling to the point where they were making fish tanks with the undergravel systems already built in them, and a lot of them were reverse flow besides the other kind, because what had happened is the ones that sucked in the water in from the top to the bottom, they realized their mistake, so they started doing this reverse flow. Let's put the water from the bottom going up. And that really didn't work either, because I remember doing a reverse flow for some students back in the 70s. And imagine each uplift tube, okay, having a pump that pumps 600 gallons an hour pushing down into the gravel plates. Now imagine, not only did the pump do that, but the pump was only pumping clean water into each under gravel filter plate. Imagine that. So the water was pre-cleaned through filter floss, then through carbon, then it was pushed in to the under gravel filter plates at 600 gallons an hour. Now you would think at this kind of speed that the under gravel or your substrate wouldn't get dirty, but you would be wrong. It did get dirty, even in reverse, because even though the water was clean, and of course I don't know, I can't tell you how many microns it would clean down to, but even though the water was clean, the under gravel filter plates and going through it, it would be clean down there, because if you could look at your aquarium, the bottom glass, it was clean. Even though all that was happening, the gravel itself still got dirty. Now, how can you explain that? If it was going in reverse, you would think it wouldn't be dirty and would blow everything out, but it didn't work the way they thought. So the manufacturers now were starting to backpedal. They realized their mistakes. They realized that they speeded up something that should have been just very slow. And when I talk about very slow, under gravel filters shouldn't have been run more than maybe 10 gallons an hour, maybe 20 or 30 max. No matter how big they were, they should have been ran very, very slow, okay, to do the job they were supposed to do. And then you would buy a mechanical filter to pick up the waste. Now, if you think about what I just said, what do people do today? Well, they get a mechanical filter, like a hang-on-the-back filter, and they still buy a sponge and a sponge filter. And the sponge filter, of course, is supposedly they're biological, because if the sponge filter is going to collect dirt, henceforth the name dirt magnet, but it's also going to be biological. Then people you see on their aquariums will add a hang on the back, also to be mechanical. So they're doing the same thing as they did 40 plus years ago, where they're using a sponge filter to not only do biological, but also to act as a mechanical filter. Therefore, you have to wring them out. If you think about a sponge filter as an under gravel filter, it did the same thing. But the people just start bad-mouthing the under gravel filter, even though they came out with gravel vacs and everything else to clean your gravel. Even though they came out with products like that to facilitate in your maintenance, it still start going out of favor. Now, where did it finally end? Well, I'm going to tell you how it ended. It ended with plants, because people started dissing the under gravel filter because they were running so fast that plants couldn't grow right, because they were running 400 gallons an hour through an under gravel filter. And plants like water movement, but very slowly, which has now been proven today, which we find out. That's why heating cables and stuff like that, doing convection movement, slowly moving water through the substrate. That's why plenums took over, because they slowly move water through the substrate. And that is guaranteed. Okay, that is guaranteed that you will move water through the substrate, but very slowly. Using a plenum guarantees that. whether you have one that is a slow-moving plenum or just a plenum where you don't have any uplift tubes, it moves water slowly. And the science came out of what we did and why we did it wrong. But when you get people today who weren't even born, didn't even have a fish tank back then, and how people who had tanks back then rave about, I used to love my undergravel filter. I didn't have any problems with it. Didn't have sick fish. The things ran for years and years. I had undergravel filters, they could be set up 15 years in a tank. You never thought anything about it. You just never did. And until it was the manufacturers themselves that changed the way they were used and implemented. It wasn't the hobbyists, it was the manufacturers. Like Kodak destroying their own business. That's what manufacturers did. And then they start backpedaling and say, oh, well, reverse flow's better. You see, and reverse flow wasn't better because even at 600 gallons an hour, the substrate would still get dirty. That's just the way it was. So the people complain that, well, there's stuff underneath an undergravel filter. And believe me, I've been running plenums and undergravel filters for years. And I have to admit, I never went there and looked at the bottom of an undergravel filter and found it to be filthy dirty where I would have to clean it. Never. And I had undergravel filters set up for 15, 20 years straight and never found so much mum and dirt and detritus collected at the bottom of an undergravel filter where I felt it would be a problem. Ever. I never saw it. So these are things that never really existed, but in the hobbyist mind, they began to exist. Start dissing it. So when we look at these old advertisements, we can almost look at why it fell out of favor, how they start changing them, how they started. See, they were all trying to copy the sewage treatment facilities, but back then, just like now, the nitrogen cycle wasn't understood. It was just understood that, you had ammonia, nitrates, and nitrates had to be taken out through water changes. And then it became nitrates have to be taken out through plants. And then we learned that, well, plants, they use nitrates, but they have to convert it back into ammonium because they cannot use nitrates. And we also found out that some plants, like your crypts, they don't know how to utilize nitrates. And therefore, they store it in their cells, and eventually it destroys the plant and causes crypt rot, where it starts rotting away because they don't know how to use the nitrogen. They've never learned. So we find this out later. Right now, it's very hard to get your foot in the door to explain to people, look, you still use products that are 50, 60, 70 years old, 80 years old. You're still using very old products. But what has happened in those years is we've made them better, right? The air pump has been around a long time. Piston air pumps have been around a long time. We've just improved them where they're quieter, more reliable. They last longer. And you barely hear any noise from an air pump. And now they're even getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Technology is making them so small that, they're probably an inch in diameter by 3 inches long. Unbelievable of what technology is. We don't diss the air pump. We don't throw it out and say it's just a piece of, no, it's evolved over time. Hang on the back filters have evolved over time. Lighting systems have evolved over time. We still use lighting systems, right? But we have evolved over time. What happened to the undergravel filter, which was actually a plenum? It's because it was misused and nobody told the hobbyists how to use it correctly. And it's that simple. How to use it correctly. It was never designed to suck water into it at 400 gallons an hour. It just wasn't meant for that purpose. It was meant for biological purpose to complete the nitrogen cycle, the full nitrogen cycle, as they teach in our universities and colleges. It was designed to complete the nitrogen cycle and take care of phosphates and nitrates according to the way the nitrogen cycle really works. Even in this aquarium hobby, we are being told by people who have never used it, who weren't even born then, how bad something is, and they don't even know. Yet we still, today, we still have pet stores using undergravel filter plates because they're old mom and pop stores to this very day. And they see no reason to change because they worked. They have always worked. I hope this video, even though it may rub some people the wrong way because they insist that, well, why even set one up? Well, the benefits outweigh the negative. You know, when you have something where we like to weigh the negative and positive, right? We like to do that. But when the positive outweighs the negative, when you build a plenum and the positive far supersedes the negative effects, then what's wrong with it? Where we know for a fact from the 70s, when we put sand and things at the very bottom of the aquarium and the sand would turn black, monkey, and stink, we knew that from the 70s. I have never in my lifetime, and I bet you some of the old timers who are watching this will say that they ever had an undergravel filter that stank from fermentation. I bet you that. You'll never have an older hobbyist saying, oh, I used an undergravel filter and boy, it would stink when you would clean. No, never had it. Never. And I had undergravel filters set up for 15, 20 years straight running, and never had a problem with you going in there and ever seeing black substrate. Ever. And I bet you some of the old timers will say the same thing. They never saw it either because you never had it. Now, when I've set up tanks using sand, I've seen it. You can see it through the bottom of the glass. I've seen it with planted aquariums that used electric cables when the cables didn't run during the summertime. You could see it underneath the tank. Some of the substrates started turning black next to the glass because fluids were not moving. I've seen that. I've witnessed it. Never saw it under gravel where the gravel ever turned black because fluids are guaranteed to move. Okay? So anyhow, that's it for this video. I want to thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel and happy fish keeping.